Hi everyone, Sajid Amit here. So I'm basically trying to do this reflection video that will justify my current state of headphone ownership because see, um, so people react differently to these videos, right? Because and people are naturally very they come from very different places when it comes to sources. So in all my years in this hobby, something I've realized is it's very difficult to get the twain to meet between those who do not have any time for DACs and amps. And I've seen very experienced audiophiles who just will reject DACs and amps because they think that, you can't really get a sense of a DAC or an amp through measurements. And therefore, if you can't, and despite the fact that, my good friend Golden Sound from headphones.com has tried at least to, invest in measurement systems and measure and review a whole variety of sources and even try to explain why a certain amplifier has a certain, and I'm talking about solid state here, why a certain solid state amplifier has a certain tube characteristic, right? So he's done that. So he has tried to theorize, and I do think with good success, and also tried to sort of draw connections between measurements, and not just frequency response, of course, but a variety of different kinds of measurements to explain why a certain amp has a certain tonal character. Now, the fact of the matter is, people still will ignore, even if you are able to at least allude to some measurement artifacts in a certain source and explain away why it sounds the way it does, people will still reject it because there are a lot of people out there who will not stand for these kinds of statements. There are people out there who actually deep down want to believe that DACs and amps do not make any difference, and $100 topping DAC will sound no different from, let's say, $100,000 DAC. And so I just wondered that, for a lot of people who think, so $100,000 is an outlier. Of course, there are DACs that are around this price point. But I mean, I know a lot of people who own a $20,000 DAC, right? The Rockna Wave Dream Signature is something a lot of people own. I know a lot of people who own the Mola Mola Tambaki, which is a $30,000 DAC. I know people who own the $40,000 to $50,000 Lampisator Horizon 360. And these are some super smart people. Like, I'm not saying just because they own expensive DACs that they're smart, and neither am I saying just because they're rich they're smart. Although I do think there's a strong correlation between being rich and being smart, unless you've inherited your wealth, which is not often the case. But it's interesting to me that I find that there's this intellectual arrogance that exists when it comes to people who think that DACs don't matter, and they somehow think they have a better ability to grasp measurements and therefore facts of life. And there's a lot of intellectual hubris that goes into talking down to people who perhaps even have greater intellect, and people who have invested in higher end DACs, and just because they're very convinced that DACs and amps make a whole lot of sense because they can perceive it, and they've worked hard to invest in a system that's expensive, where maybe the source components are four times more expensive than the headphone setup, and because to them it makes sense. Like, they don't have to do a blind test. It makes a lot of sense, and because they listen to a Hollow May and they listen to a Cord Dave, and a Hollow May and a Cord Dave sound very different, and so they don't even need to get into a blind test situation. So if you are one of those who really doesn't understand DACs and amps and the differences they make, or if you are one of those who thinks all this is snake oil, and the audio industry has these insane snake oil merchants, and all of us are buying into snake oil and encouraging snake oil, I would really recommend that you at least try to visit a store and get like an audition of a Cord Dave. And it's difficult to get into a situation where you can A/B a Cord Dave and a Hollow May, but I feel like anyone who really wants to experience these things can. You just have to be enterprising about it. You have to be smart about it. You actually have to be intelligent about it. Like, so I live in a country where I would never have been able to experience these things, but I have experienced everything under the sun. That, I hope you understand, takes a lot of enterprise and creativity. Like, I think I'm the only person in my country who's ever owned Cord Dave or Hollow May. But I've done it. I've sold them. I took a risk in buying them and selling them, and I was smart about it. I got them at a reduced price. The Hollow May I bought when it was actually at a lower price. The Cord Dave I got a good deal on from a dealer. And yeah, I took a bit of a hit, but see, the hit was fine with me because I got to experience audio, and for me that was fine. So I'm able to put a quantitative value, not exact quantitative value, but I'm able to sort of understand the investment that I made, right? And I think it's worked out for me. So I'm also someone who thinks that I shouldn't. I'm not generally afraid of spending money. I do invest most of my income. So most of what you see in my audio stable, and if you want to know what I own, you can go to my HeadFi handle. It's Sajid Amit, and you can check out my signature. And in my signature, you'll see what I own, and it's a pretty high-end setup. And it's bought with my own money. You don't generally get discounts on things that I've bought, like the Audma, like the AIC. The AIC I got a discount on. I have the Abyss and the Manis and so on and so forth, the Mola Mola Chambaki. Okay, so, but see, the reason I spent money on audio, and I think it's worked out for me, is because I honestly feel that you have to be able to target expenditures. That this is just my approach, to be able to inspire and motivate yourself to generate more income. And I don't mean to give you guys a pep talk or motivational speech at all, but I do think that there's this correlation between these audio debates I feel like a lot of us get into and how people perceive money. And I do think at the heart of it is how people perceive money, right? Because people think spending on audio doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you can get a $200 IEM or you can get a $200 headphone and you can be done with it. And I respect that, right? I'm not making light of people's economic situation, because for a lot of people at this stage of life, they have other constraints for which they might not be able to spend on audio. But just the way I understand that, and I wouldn't judge that, I would also hope that at the very least, even if one is not inspired by other people's stories of success, material success, at the very least, one would pause from judging someone else for having the resources to invest in a high-end setup and deciding to. Because I mean, a lot of people come back and say, "Hey, no, I have it's not about money. It's about brains. It's about science and so forth." But just because you have a certain measurement system at your disposal doesn't mean that's the only possible measurement system that's appropriate to measuring a piece of electronics. That to me is pretty. I mean, it's banal. It's a banal statement. It's pretty common. It's commonsensical. I'll give you an example of the frequency response graph. At a time when a lot of mainstream reviewers were saying that the frequency response graph, and they were treating it as a Bible, and I don't want to name reviewers or name videos when this was said, but you can look it up, that headphones and IEMs that strayed from this frequency response graph were said to be tonally incorrect. And even more than reviewers and influencers, a lot of audiophiles would jump on that bandwagon and still do, and dismiss anything that doesn't have the Harman level of pinna gain, or even like it have more mid bass than what the Harman 2018 graph allows, or have a little more air frequency than what the Harman 2018 graph allows. At different points, a lot of these influencers have mentioned, and a lot of other audiophiles have pointed out, that a lot of these measurement rigs do not do treble well. And if you measure these IEMs and headphones on different rigs, you'll get varying depictions of mid treble, even upper treble, and all that, right? But somehow people sort of fall into the comfort zone of criticizing transducers, headphones, and IEMs that stray from the Harman target. And that has happened for a long time. And I was the one calling it out at that time, among others, I'm sure. And I was saying, this is just one way of understanding what a certain headphone sounds like. What about how this earphone is interacting with my anatomy? And then I looked into some research and I looked into some academic research. That wasn't hard to do. And I mentioned them and I linked them in my Campfire Audio Trifecta review. So do check it out. I'll leave a link to that. Maybe not right away at the time of filming this, but afterwards. But do look for it, the Campfire Audio Trifecta review. And see, so I do audios in a pretty, I do reviews in a pretty casual way. I'm an audio enthusiast first, reviewer second. I do reviews because I like talking into the camera. That's partially it. I also like talking about audio, and I like engaging people about that sort of discussion. That's a part of my hobby. If you check out that video on Campfire Trifecta, it got decent views. It didn't get like 100,000 views like a lot of the super large reviewers get. But for me, I'm very happy with that sort of reviews. It got, I think, more than 10,000 views, and I was very happy about that video because of not just because the views it got, but the engagement it got, right? And in that video, I did dig up research that talked about ear anatomy and how your outer ear, your middle ear, and your inner ear, and how your entire anatomy will influence how you perceive treble. And in certain frequencies, like 6 kilohertz and 7 kilohertz, and if there's a peak that's perceptible for you, it doesn't mean that someone else will perceive these peaks at the same places, or they can perceive it further up the frequency response graph, which would basically mean that this person could be more impervious to those things if that's basically what the person's conditioning has been, or if that is the state of the person's ear anatomy. So, I mean, that's pretty common sense, right? And it also depends on your preferences. It really depends on so many things. It depends on the genres you like. I like rock and metal, so no one is going to tell me that the Harman upper mids is ideal. It's just no one. I mean, that's just not going to work for me, And I don't think, and people say this is what it sounds like in real life. People say this is what it sounds like in a well-treated room with speakers. I mean, well-treated room is just such a strange thing to say, because there are these different levels of room treatment, and it can, I don't know. I feel like I listened to a lot of live music growing up because I grew up around musicians, and I know a lot of influencers who claim this, and I'm sure that they have. How you perceive sound from instruments depends on so many things. Depends on the venue. Depends on your positioning in that venue, and so there's a lot more going on than frequency response, And I feel like it's now that a lot of mainstream reviewers have come around to this, and they are openly talking about how this is, a preference target, emphasis on the article A. It's a single preference target, and now others are using ranges to show, what the preference, where human preferences lie. The architect of some of this research is now, walking back on some of the earlier research and talking about how perhaps the Harman in-ear target was not as useful. There are other influencers saying how the Harman in-ear target had a smaller sample size. I was the one who first officially called it out in a pretty significant way in my Campfire Trifecta review, because I am, among other things, a statistician by training. I just feel that there's a lot going on here, and that people don't understand, and we got carried away by graphs, and some of the most intense persons who were banding around these graphs, and I talk about regular audiophile here on different forums, were perhaps the ones that had the least engagement with science, because science is not some catchphrase. There's good science and there's bad science. There's bro science. If you've ever been to a gym, the amount of bro science that's dished out on the uses and benefits of BCAA or pre-workouts or even protein shakes, I mean, it's pretty random, and I'm also a researcher by training, guys. I have over 20 Scopus Index Q1 journal articles. And guys, I mean, I suck at many things. I'm not good at so many things, right? But I'm good at this. I'm an academic, and I don't know many audio reviewers or reviewers in general who have 20, 25 Scopus Index Q1 journals. And maybe that's a flex, but deep down in my heart, I know I'm not flexing. If I was flexing, I'd be leading with this. I'd be talking about this more and more. I don't. But the fact is, I understand research. I understand the limitations of research. I understand the subjective judgment of the researcher when designing a study, identifying a sample, drawing conclusions. Research isn't what you think it is. Even medical research is highly contentious. A lot of you are familiar with how eggs are good one day, eggs are bad the other day, right? Because research says so. You have to look at who's sponsoring the research. So, guys, all I'm saying is there's a lot of things at play here. There's capital at play. There's when it comes to research, you have to look at who's sponsoring the research. There is human preferences at play. There is a lot of bias and subjectivity at play. So if you want to come at me or anyone and just say you don't believe in science, this is what science says, you might as well do voodoo, that's just very easy and a low-hanging fruit as by the way of arguing, and that's just very honestly infantile. And I don't want to sound like being condescending, but it is something that I think is worthy of some level of criticism, if not ridicule. That people, are so close-minded when it comes to audio. Of course, there is snake oil, and there's a lot of it. And there's a fun headphones.com video from the Munich High-End Festival, and that talks about snake oil. So there's a whole bunch of things that I think would be, consider snake oil. And I know there's a lot of deceit as well, and there's a lot of things that are overpriced and all that, right? This notion that all of detail retrieval is treble is something that my experience doesn't bear out, because it's not that, one way of countering that perspective would be to say that if you take an LCD5, which doesn't have a whole lot of treble energy anywhere in the treble, and you compare it with other headphones that have more of a treble lift, and you could find a number of other headphones that have more of a treble lift, from the Edition XS, from Hyphaman to the Sundara, to any number of headphones, and you could take different headphones that have a lift and treble energy at different points of the treble frequency spectrum, from lower treble to mid treble to upper treble, and I would say the LCD5 would out-resolve all of these headphones. But also, I've noticed how there is a correlation with headphones that are very resolving and headphones that have lifted treble. So I'm not saying that lifted treble doesn't give you a perception of greater resolution, because I know it does, for sure, more clarity, and therefore perhaps people associate that with more resolution. But a lot of lower level signals, I think, do get lost in, let's say, less quality transducers, headphones, and IMs. So I'm not willing to buy that all of resolution is treble. I'm not willing to buy that Harman has figured out how much mid-bass an IM or headphone should have. I'm not willing to buy that bass extension is always something that you perceive the weight graphs. Of course, it really depends on how the transducers are coupling on your head. I'm not willing to buy that upper mids have to be as pronounced as the Harman graph dictates. I'm not even willing to buy that two headphones that have a similar level of upper mid sound the same or will sound equally shouty. I'm not willing to buy that treble explains soundstage completely. I do understand it's all psychoacoustics when it comes to soundstage, but who cares? It's still, there's a sense of roominess you get with certain headphones that you don't get with others. I'm not willing to buy that dynamics like punch and slam is explained completely by the frequency response graph, because I've seen a lot of headphones that have similar frequency response graphs and they don't slam or punch the same way. So there's a lot going on that we don't understand, and I wish we had the humility to understand what we don't understand, and just say we don't understand it yet. As I was saying, there hasn't been a single measurement, a single experiment until in the last 30 years that has proven that DACs and amps don't matter, or they matter. Because it's not enough for me to say that there hasn't been any proof. It's because I don't think we have come up with the ways of making these assertions yet, which is okay. Maybe it does exist in audio in general. It just hasn't made its way to our hobby. So basically, guys, I'm going to do a series of videos where I do reflections, because every time I travel, and it's maybe evident from the fact that I'm in a hotel room, I am traveling, and I do feel like I want to chat about audio. I want to reflect. I want to talk and think through things they're on my mind, and just share my views. So that's what I'm doing here. This is going to be a series of videos where I talk about what I own, what I think, and just general thoughts. I wish I could do podcasts with some of you. If you guys are interested in getting into a podcast kind of situation, if you like public speaking, if you think you are someone who would like to be heard, and honestly, if you think you're articulate, because that matters, because I don't want to lose views, and you want to have like discussions and podcasts, with me, I would welcome that, because I do miss having discussions with people. I do it online on HeadPhi, but I want to have more discussions. I just don't want to do reviews. I do like doing reviews, but I also want to do discussions. I want to do podcasts, long form, short form, what have you. So that's it, guys. I'll do another one where I talk about why I own the headphones that I own. Guys, I currently own 4 headphones, and it's a pretty strange combination. It is the Abyss AB12665TC, which, by the way, is an amazing headphone, and you can use EQ on it. And I'm not someone who's a big practitioner of EQ, but this headphone takes to EQ like a champ. And I also have found the right source chain for the bass, which I think makes it a better headphone for all genres than I have ever experienced it. And this is with the old pads. So I own the Abyss. The new pads are coming my way. I've ordered a couple of cables for the Abyss because they're of different materials, and cables I'll get into later. I want to test them. Like, I'm not saying that I'll hear a difference, guys. But I want to test them. If I don't like them, I'll just sell it. I'll just sell them. So, I also own the Imanis, the RAL 1995 Imanis, and that to me is the pinnacle of headphone tech. People have complained about how bright it can be, and I do think it can be of the wrong source chain. It is a neutral bright headphone, but it does think so well because it sort of has the vocal magic of a lot of high-fiber headphones. It has the bass that a lot of high-fiber headphones or even planars don't have, extension, rumble, slam. It has this sort of out-of-the-head sort of feel. It's very resolving. It's got a lot of clarity, and yeah, it's just so much fun. And then I own the Focal Clear OGs, which I really, really like. The more I listen to the bass and the Imanis, the more and more I'm inclined to sell the Focal Clear, because just going from the Imanis to the Focal Clear makes it sound like a closed back. I feel like the Imanis makes most headphones sound like a closed back, and the bass is one of them. One of the headphones that withstood the raising of the bar by the Imanis. The 6XX I still own because it does pair exceedingly well with the Audma HPA1, which is a ridiculous thing to say. I know it's a $10,000 amp, but I own it and I enjoy it, so it's not ridiculous in my life situation. The 6XX becomes just wider sounding. One of my friends said this is the first time he's heard the 6XX half stage, and it's much better than any tube what can do. And I understand people have compared the Audma to tube, but again, I don't think they've done it in the privacy of their homes while having own both, bereft of, or without any bias or what have you, because we do tend to have some subjective owner's bias, and we want to sort of position what we own. But I've had the Felix U4 Anniversary Edition with upgrade tubes next to the Audma, driving the 6XX. The OTL didn't stand a chance. Right? Because the Audma also renders the treble of the 6XX more clear, gives it more punch and slam. It's just beautiful. But again, I do think that at some point I'll be selling these lower price headphones. You get what you pay for most of the time. But then you don't always get what you pay for, because in this hobby, I've come into products which are more expensive, but lower price products are better. Just because that happens doesn't mean that happens all the time, or even that happens most of the time. The HoloMay perhaps is a better DAC in terms of resolution and technical performance than many DACs that are higher priced. But that doesn't mean that there are no DACs that are better than the HoloMay. And there are many DACs that are more expensive, most DACs that are more expensive than the HoloMate are better than the HoloMate in my experience. Similarly, the 6XX is better than many headphones that are more expensive. But that doesn't mean that all expensive headphones are snake oil, or that doesn't even mean that most expensive headphones are inferior to the 6XX. So I think that's worth keeping in mind, guys. There's a lot of stuff out there. For example, I like the Focal Clear OGs better than the Focal Clear Utopia 2020 version. Somehow, I've never connected the 2020 version. It just sounds more fake to me than the previous version, the Focal Clear OGs. Because the new Focal Clear, or the Newtopia, the Newtopia has never jived with me the way the OG Utopia did. The OG Utopia was amazing, but it kept having driver failures, so that is not a headphone I'll buy again. I've had 2 driver failures with the OG Utopia. The Newtopia is somewhat smoother here and there, and just destroyed it for me. These are minor changes, but I just do not connect with it. Again, a lot of people will say, these changes are so minor, how do you not connect with it? Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm that sensitive to little changes in tuning. Maybe my hearing is that good. See, I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying everything is possible, but I don't like the Newtopia, and I like the Focal Clear more. And I don't even think the Newtopia, to my perception, is that much more technical than the OG Focal Clear. And to me, that's just a lot of money wasted. So I do understand when someone comes and says that, hey, I don't like people attacking everything to do with DACs and amps. It doesn't mean that person automatically is this uncritical consumer of everything high end. That's not what it means. That does mean that the person is more open to high end, that the person has, perhaps because of means and perhaps because of interest, the person is more excited by high end, the whole journey of high end, whether it's the aesthetics of high end, whether it's the, how fulfilling that experience is in a beautiful audio store that's a high end audio store, and that interaction and the technology and that history and that journey. And above all, the sound. The sound is what keeps it all together. If high end didn't sound good, nobody would be investing in high end, guys. Okay, so that's a lot of discussion with respect to high end versus not so high end. But I also want to say that I understand why certain lower price headphones are preferable. And I completely understand that, guys. But I don't knock everything that's higher priced, because that's just stupid. Anyway, so that's it for me, guys. Sajid Amit signing out. Keep watching my videos, and I'll do another one where I do more extended reviews, and I'll show you the products that I own. And what I'll do is I'll talk about what I don't own and why, because I have worked hard enough that I think at this point, if I liked a lot of other headphones, I'd be buying them, but I just don't like other headphones as much anymore. Whether it's, all the other Summit 5 competitors that you can think of, I'm not buying. And I'll tell you why I'm not buying all these other $6,000, $5,000, $4,000, $3,000 headphones. In a way, I'll give you a full review of all the Summit 5 flagship products out there and talk about why I own what I do and why those other headphones didn't jive with me. So that's it. Sajid Amit signing out, and stay tuned for the next one. Bye-bye.